thank you. There was a psychologist years ago, Dr. Stunkard, who did some research on human subjects. Not sure you could do it nowadays, but he fed people through a tube, nutritionally adequate but tasteless, and they could have as much as they want, unlimited. And what not surprisingly, over time, people were eating less and less and lost weight. Now, there's no way that that morphs into policy, so it's kind of, we know some solutions, but then what are the ones that work in free-living populations? A little bit of humor there.
Let's move on to questions from the audience. Yes, please.
मैं सर DK Mada, Punjab University, India. We know that a huge agricultural subsidies are being given by the OECD countries to make their product competitive in the world market mainly. And I want to know why the high-income countries are not reducing their subsidy burden to benefit the developing countries at least. Because by making their product competitive or by increasing their agriculture productivity in the high-income countries, they can also do something. Thank you.
I have two questions. One is the evidence on diverting land for biofuels. To what extent it correlates with food inflation? That is one. The second is, what is the evidence on GM foods? Because there's a lot of difference of opinion in the OECD itself. So any comments on that?
I guess to answer the first question, you make a really good point, bringing up the price distortion effects of subsidies, and how, at least looking at the U.S. example, U.S. farm policy, and when we look at the foods that we export, the way that hurts a lot of developing countries. I completely agree with you. When we look at enabling sustainable development and we look at helping out, the people that our aid programs are designed to support, oftentimes farm subsidies are working in direct competition of those often good public objectives and goals. The challenge is political. Farm subsidies are a reality of American politics. It's often said that the road to the White House starts in Iowa, where you're surrounded by corn farmers. And so when you're looking at, at the highest levels, public policy support for subsidies, you have to look at the way our political system is structured. And honestly, I don't have a lot of optimism about any changes in that regard.
Let me take the, just FYI, I know this may be unrelated, but the current Secretary of Agriculture in the U.S. is from Iowa. There was a group convened by FAO, researchers from around the world, that looked at the issue of biofuels, and estimates vary. At the high end is about 30% increase in the food prices that spike due to the biofuels. I think by whatever metric, this is not a very efficient policy. So. GM foods continues to be controversial. I think on the, there was a OECD event, and at this point I was representing U.S. government, so as representing a government point of view, it was sponsored by the European Union. And for me, the most persuasive argument was a official from Zimbabwe who got up and said to both Europeans and Americans, I don't want either the U.S. or Europe making decisions for us about GM crops. I think there is limited evidence of negative nutrition effects. I think the environmental issues are somewhat different, but it very quickly morphs from science into ideology, is my sense on that.
Yes. I'll just maybe have one comment. Okay.
Yeah. Regarding the two very quick points regarding the new subsidies, I think this is why the very prolonged WTO negotiations, we just have to strongly encourage our political leaders and our negotiators to bring closure, because that would provide at least a modest amount of discipline. They will not be able to go backwards. Now going forwards is another question, but I think that's the one thing we have to encourage in all of our economies and countries. We have to encourage a conclusion to that round. It's taken quite a long time. The other thing on the GM side of things, personally, I wish the discussion there was not quite so binary, like either or. I think there are gradients of GM products. I heard some discussion this morning about biofortification, certain things that have pest resistance, certain nutrient compounds that are definitely technologies that, to me, it's a tool that we can use very constructively to meet nutritional and health objectives, as well as better assure farmers a decent living, or at least a staple crop. There are other applications that I think societies do want to reflect on, and you don't want to adopt, impose, as the comment was made, one nation's agendas over another, or if it is going to be an international agreement, it will take some time to iron out. But there are some, I would not say low-lying fruit, but I think we need more subtlety around that argument, because there's a lot of promise in biotechnology and what our crop scientists and our livestock scientists have to offer with us. Anyway, thanks.
Perhaps on the agriculture subsidy from the European side, one could add that it's amazing that a sector that has perhaps 3% of the total income, GDP, is having such an impact on the policy, at the policy level, and that's politics, and it's the power of lobbying groups, and it has been discussed. The same question could have been asked in an agriculture economic meeting or development economic meeting. It's totally incoherent with economic efficiency. It's totally incoherent with development policy. You're absolutely right, but it has turned out to be a very, very sticky issue. The concern is that with renewable energy and bioenergy, we are going to, or we have already, I'm not talking about Germany, we have already introduced tremendous distortions that turn things partly upside down. A very, very difficult situation, I agree. We have other hands, please.
Richard Tiffin from the University of Reading in the UK. My question is really, to what extent do the panel think perhaps that the emphasis when we're talking about chronic disease, the emphasis on nutrition is actually somewhat misplaced? The disease is clearly a multidimensional disease, and there are lots of contributory factors, and what we might do in fact is in focusing on nutrition is actually encourage a substitution. What people actually do is they choose a healthy or otherwise lifestyle, and if they find that they move their nutrition in a particular direction, what we find is that they substitute other unhealthy aspects of their lifestyle. And what we should be actually focusing on is not just nutrition, but more on lifestyle choice.
Absolutely.
Yeah, I saw an interesting, ouch, sorry about that. I saw an interesting graphic a while ago looking at the sort of ubiquitous USDA food pyramid, and that's supposed to influence the choices that consumers make about the foods they consume and the quantity they consume them in. The image has been updated considerably, but what the graphic attempted to show was that if you look at the food pyramid, what we were actually subsidizing was almost the inverse of that. So I attempted to look to see to what extent does farm policy subsidize bad health. In my research, I found that there's actually not any sort of causal connection at all. But I don't think you can ignore the price impact on the decisions we make about what to eat. I mean, we're really driven by cost and convenience, at least in the U.S. And taste, which and so going back to one of Eileen's earlier points, though, you do hear a lot of economists argue that, well, if we want people to eat less, maybe we should. If we want to help encourage them to make lifestyle changes, maybe we should change the pricing mechanisms behind the foods that they consume. Make unhealthy foods more expensive and make healthy foods less expensive, maybe looking at the tobacco model of raising revenue in the meantime. The challenge with that is that there's not really an alternative for unhealthy, cheap foods. And so if all of a sudden the prices of those were raised without corresponding drops in the price of healthy food, I think you'd see even more malnourishment and more people go hungry. And you could have some pretty severe unintended consequences. But I absolutely agree with your general point that you have to look at lifestyle changes in a more holistic concept because a lot goes into dietary disease.
Let me just add something on that. Of course, everybody would love a more healthy lifestyle, but if you think about how people's lives really are, people commute an hour a day, an hour and a half a day. They've got kids at home. They work 8 hours. They get home at 7 o'clock at night. To wear off the calories of one piece of chocolate cake, you've got to go run for an hour and a half. So I agree, people should be exercising irregardless of whether you're overweight or not. That's number one, because you can still get diseases even if you're thin. The exercise is an important thing for cardiovascular and for everything else. But sometimes I hear people say, well, you know, if people went exercising, then the eating wouldn't be a problem. We wouldn't have to think about how many Cokes they eat, drink, or whatever it is. But in fact, the caloric intake is so high from that sugary food and those energy-dense foods now that it would be you'd have to be an athlete of just spending your whole time running off your calories that you ran in the day. So it's a nice thing. We need physical exercise no matter what, even for underweight people or anything. But I don't think that's a solution for getting it. And I'm getting to the point now where I just don't think there's an easy solution or even a solution for the overweight, obese in countries like America, where the geographic, the zoning, the whole system is such that you have to drive everywhere. You can't walk anywhere. Unless you're blessed, you live in a small town that you can walk to wherever you're going. You have to get in the car or ride the metro or ride the bus. So we've built cities, we've subsidized the car industry, and that's all part of the whole systemic problem where we are right now. So, and I think raising the price of food, given it's so cheap, even if you raise it by 10% or 15%, it probably wouldn't affect people's food choices, and probably wouldn't affect malnutrition in the United States either.
One quick supplementary point to what Linda just said too. Actually, when you look at the American diet, one of the reasons we put on weight is because we're consuming more food, and sometimes that's the reason we're said to consume more food is because per package, packaging size is increased. And as a food manufacturer, if per unit costs are falling, rather than make your product cheaper, you can make it bigger and charge the same amount. And so I think that's a corporate decision as well that Linda rightly points out.
Okay, Brett, you had one point. We are discussing quite intensively the U.S. Nutrition problems.
Yeah, I'd just like to exploit my position currently to try and draw on the collective wisdom around the room. In Canada, our food labeling, in trying to meet so many nutritional objectives and environmental objectives and other objectives, animal welfare objectives, the labeling has become so complex that there's this avalanche of information, and I'm wondering if some of the part of it is just choice and sort of addiction to lipids, I guess is what I'm hearing. But part of it is okay, there's so much information out there, everybody claiming to be greener or more nutritious than the next guy, that the consumer, quite frankly, may not, may shrug their shoulders up and then go buy a Diet Coke. I put that out there in terms of communication as an industry, from the retailers on down to the processors. Like, it seems to me when we give people an avalanche of information, often in tabular format that you need PhD, maybe two, to actually understand. And then there's a time factor. I'm just not sure if we're communicating things effectively for people to make those wise choices. And then when the time factor's thrown in there besides, people just grab something off the shelf, and then the taste is easy. I like that taste. Just a comment, throw it open to those sitting at the panel and around the room.
Do we have further questions from the floor? I don't see any hands from the floor. Eileen,
This will be my last intervention, but
well, maybe you
I just,
can sum it up.
you know, it's your comment, Patrick, about the food guide pyramid, comment about the label. I've always seen those as two examples of tools, but by themselves, and I used to say this and it would annoy people, that no one ever changed their behavior based on dietary guidelines or the food guide pyramid. It's the utilization of that, the promotion of that. We spend a lot of time on the science part, and I think that's extraordinarily important. What is the consensus around healthful eating? But if you look at the legislation for U.S. dietary guidelines, it's review and revise. But the second part that rarely gets talked about is promotion of dietary guidelines for healthy lifestyle, and I don't believe we've done very well on that.
Perhaps we come to a conclusion. We discussed certainly the direction of agriculture policies being in many directions, but not so much focused on nutrition and health as it perhaps should be in a holistic way of looking at the issue. There is a lot to learn from developed countries, but also it's not a one-way street. As the discussion has shown, the U.S. perhaps, as you mentioned, can perhaps learn a lot from others, and I would include Europe and other countries too. It's not a one-way street. I think the discussion has shown that we need integration of policies and programs, and we need a whole system approach, the holistic approach. It's the patchwork, as Eileen has articulated, is not going to get us anywhere. We need to look at the whole behavior. Why are people selecting, or maybe lifestyle going even further than that? The whole lifestyle needs to be the focus of attention and research to understand why people behave the way they do behave. And that's a big task. The risk and the climate change connection, what is that going to do to food systems, and what is needed to better be prepared for risky situations? What are the instruments that help us to better manage, and perhaps when it has happened, to cope with risks? Volatility of markets was mentioned there. Maybe it's somewhat a controversial issue. Food markets are inherently volatile. And I would say there is very little we can do to the low elasticity that is characterizing food markets. So in the end, my feeling is, if we want to get more stability into the food markets, there is some kind of intervention necessary. We used to have food reserves, which we ran down, and the markets react quite volatile with very, very high costs. Part of the costs are also, that was perhaps not so articulated in the discussion, is an increasing distrust of the world of countries in the functioning of the world market. The export bans are a visible sign of countries not trusting that in case of an emergency situation where they will have access to sufficient food from the world market. And if that habit spreads, that would really undermine the world market again under very, very high cost. These are the issues that perhaps, if I have a look at it, I would bring to the plenary too. The delivery system, we have looked, and some of the papers have emphasized the multi-sectoral need for delivery systems. In implementing multi-sectoral approaches, we have a lot of problems. We have, in fact, line ministries to coordinate their work is an important task. We discussed that in other sessions too. How to combine, how to coordinate different activities in different sectors represented by different ministries and administrative structures into a coherent approach is not an easy task. These are some of the points. Perhaps some further ones I can think of when I prepare for the next session. With that, I would like to thank the panelists. They think they deserve a very big applause. And I thank all the attendants and discussants. Thank you.
Thank you. I think we enjoyed it.
Yeah.
The panel enjoyed
Great.
it.
Yeah. Always.
Amy, I have a question from BASF.
You know the friend.